welcome to Conquering Mount Scrapmore with Brenda. I'm Brenda, and today we're doing part 7 of the Sunflower Quilt sew-along. Last week you were asked to put 3 sashings around each of your blossoms, right? So your blocks kind of look like this. Well, today, this week, we're going to show you how to attach your rows. Now, the most important thing, and you're going to have to decide, is where your flowers go. Then take, if you lay down on the floor or design wall or whatever, take a picture. Once you get your 3 sashings on, take a picture of how you want this quilt to go. That's very important. If you have one of those smartphone cameras, it's real easy to do. But right now, we're going to show you how to join your rows together. And that's all we're going to do this week finish up the holes in your sashing, because next week we will actually be joining the rows together. So come on a little closer. One of the viewers has asked us to review knots, the quilter's knots for hand sewing. So we're going to take a little bit more time today to explain all of that too. So come on over. We've got some joining to do. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to take a piece of thread. Now, when I take thread, I make sure it's no longer than my index finger to my elbow, doubled, right? Because otherwise the thread just tangles, right? So I'm going to kind of measure it and make it a little bit shorter than the length that I need. So that's all I'm doing. Now I'm going to thread my needle, and hopefully this won't be too painful for you to watch as I try and thread this needle. There it is. Ooh, not too bad, not too bad. So then basically what I do is I kind of have it, kind of where I have one long tail, the one long tail here, and the one short tail. Now what I'm going to do, get this out of the way, what I'm going to do with my one long tail is I'm going to lay it along the length of my needle, like so. And I'm just going to hold it like that, and then I'm going to wrap it around. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now I'm doing it 10 times because I want you to be able to see the knot. You only need to wrap it around 2 or 3 times, right? But I want you to be able to see this knot. So then I hold the needle as hard as I can in my fingers, and I pull all of my thread through, and I keep holding on to that wad of thread, and now I have a knot. Oops, there we go. Do you see this knot here? Well, they can't see it if it's up against this knot right there. Like I say, I made it so you can see the knot, right? Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to decide now, when we do our pieces, which side has the most seams. And this side has the most seams, so that's going up towards me. That's going to be facing me. And this is the seam that has, we're only looking at one seam here. So we're just going to flip it around. And we're going to make sure it's kind of centered, but we're going to offset it like this. Right? Because we're going to basically join this way. Right? So what happens is you get your dots and you pin your dots. Now I'm going to pin and push that seam. There's a seam here underneath. I'm just going to push it out of the way, and I'm going to place this pin right in where my point is. So here's my point on the back, and I'm going to press it right into the point of the seam. Okay, and I'm just going to tip it and pin it, just so I now have placement for this piece. And then I'm going to put it where the dot is, and pin it right about 1/4 inch down. So now these 2 lines line up perfectly. Okay, so then I just put one in the middle, just to kind of put it in place. Now, this is where you see whether or not you've got anything you have to ease in. Now I dropped this center pin about 1/4 inch down, so I have something to aim for, right? So now you see whether or not you have to ease something in. And we have a little bit of excess here. Remember, this is on the bias, so there might be some excess. So what I do is I drop down right where that first pin goes, right beside it. And I come out the other end on right beside it. And I make my very first stitch. And I go as close as I can. And I pull my thread through till I get to my knot. Then I go back through the same spot. And I try and not come out the same place. But I've got the thread from the eye. And I'm going to loop it around and under the business end of the needle. Here, I'll do it again for you. Because this is where I'm making my slip knot. Oops, there. Okay, this is where I'm making my slip knot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the eye of the needle, both strands, and put it around and under to make my slip knot and pull my needle. Right? Okay, now I'm going to do 2 hand over knots. Right? Oh, I'm not in the right spot. Okay, I'm going to do 2 hand over knots. So this is the first. I'm holding my needle up like this, and I grab the thread this way and pull it around and then put the needle through the big hole. And 1, 2. Now everybody kind of does their own little thing. All the hand pieces I know kind of do their own little thing. Some just do the slip knot. I want my stuff to have a little bit more security. Now, when we're working out this, there's just a slight bubble here. And basically what we're going to do is ease this in. And so I take my 3 little stitches, going towards it. And I pull through. Remember, you're breathing. And then I go half a stitch back. So I back stitch half a stitch. And then I continue to make my 3 little stitches. And that back stitch, what it's going to do is prevent the whole seam from, rolling, coming undone and all the rest of this, right? So now you're only, on this quilt, one of the things you got to keep in mind is you're only sewing 3 inches at a time. Or 3, basically, if you're following the pattern for the big sunflower. And this is the only thing, I haven't pinned all the rest of the parts that I'm going to put together. Right? So, as I'm going, I'm just going to go, I got to get more thread there. 1 back, half stitch back. Now I'm going to come up, try and come up as close as I can where that needle intersects, pull it out of the way. And now I aim for the next. And you can see where that little bubble was. It's now all been eased in, right? There's still a little tiny bubble here, but you can just press it flat. Fabric is very forgiving actually. And I'm not manhandling any of this. I've got my work supported either on my lap or a table or something, when I'm doing it. There. The other thing I'm going to caution you against, and I know you're going to be very proud of what you're doing and you want to show everybody and hold it up, but when you're holding it up, and I do this as well, I hold it up and I stretch it to make sure it lies flat on top and make sure everybody can see them as much of it as they can. And without your stay stitching, you will pop seams. And this, because there's so much bias on the edge, you will stretch your shapes. So I'm just going to make sure, get right to, now I'm going to try and work myself right to this pin here, because that's where I do another slip knots, or series of slip knots. So I'm going to do my 3 little stitches, or 2.5, and I'm going to come up right where that needle is, right there. See my pin is there. Okay, now I'm going to pull it out, pull my thread through, do a half stitch back and come right out again on the same spot. I'm going to take the thread from the back, the eye of the needle, wrap it around and under because I've reached a seam. And I'm going to pull, I think it's got caught, hang on. I'm just going to I got caught on the other thread. Oh well. And then pull, and that's my slip knot. And then I'm going to grab, my needle is held up. I'm going to grab the thread and do a hand over and put the needle through the hole once and then twice. And now this is where some hand sewers cut their thread and they start over again. I'm just going to put through my needle right through to the other side of this, right here like so, on the other side of that seam. Pull it through. Now I'm going to stop and readjust my fabric, my pieces, and I'm going to pin them in place, because now I start this whole process of sewing only 3 inches at a time together, right? So I'm just going to put my pins back in place, and we start. Now we do this like a few times, because every time you hit a seam or a blind seam, you want to make that slip knot and 2 hand over knots. So now I'm going to make, the first thing I'm going to do is make my slip knot. Just one little stitch, pull this in front and under the needle, right, just like that. And then, oops, oh, I made a knot. Oh no, there I didn't. And then 2 hand over knots, or we used to call these granny knots, but I guess it's not politically correct. Now you're going to continue hand sewing until you hit this seam right here. And that's where you do your hand over and then your slip knot, and then your 2 hand over knots go through the seam, and then we'll go across again. So basically it's the same thing now over and over again, right? But just to sew your pieces on. Now sewing these rows together is not very hard. It doesn't take long. It took me, I sat down one day and I did it all, but I know you guys are working and you're doing other things, and you know, and it's a good time for you guys to, you know, if you're still trying to do things, you know, to catch up. That works too, right? Oh, so here we go. We do our slip knot over, like you take the thread from under the needle. Oops, wait a minute, now it's all hung up in there. Why? Okay, so now, okay, I had to start again. Take your thread from behind the needle, slip it under the front of the needle, and then pull your needle through, then 2 hand over knots. Okay, and then you go through the seam and you do a slip knot. So you go down just 1 stitch, grab the thread from your back of your needle, go around and through. There we go. And then 2 hand over knots again. And then you just sew across till you hit this seam here, this one right here. It's funny, I always make a couple extra blocks when I do stuff like this, and now I've made I'm going to make a table runner and give it to one of my daughters. So we'll see who, I'm not sure who wants a table runner, but we'll see, we'll find out from them. They don't know it's coming. They don't watch this channel, so it's like, if your kids aren't interested in quilting, yeah. Again, okay, we're at the end, we're at this seam, and I'm gonna take the needle, the thread from the back of the needle, and go under, pull through, and then pull the needle straight up, grab the thread from the back, put the needle through the big hole, and do 2 hand over knots. Just like that. And then thread through, and start all over again with that slip knot. Actually, some people, like I say, some people only do slip knot, but that's up to you. I know this is a little more work and a little more fiddly, So I did my slip knot, I got my 2 hand over knots. After a while, the rhythm of this gets you can get very quick at it. So, but, okay. And when I end my thread, like when I get to this point here, this point right here, what I'll do is I'll put 3 hand over knots. So, just so you know, and then I cut my thread. But just so it's secure in its place. No. I always tell people aim for even, not necessarily small. And what do? I go too small. Okay, so there I'm at my needle point. I go halfway through and up right on the needle, right there. You see it? And I pull my thread from the back around, around underneath. And I pull my needle through, and there's my slip knot. And my hand over knot is here. And again, I just realized I forgot to put thread conditioner on my thread. I wonder it's dragging. And then once I do my 2 hand over knots, I slip it through to come out on the dot, or as close to the dot as I can. And I'm just going to now reposition my fabric from underneath. We're just about done. So I'll come back when we're finished this, and then I'll show you, explain to you what else you need to do. Okay, and here we are, we're done. We've joined our row. Now, this is going to end up being a table runner, and I know I said in previous episodes, if you're doing a table runner and that's all you're doing, go 5 around every blossom except for the 1 and make that 6. So you would be done already. But when you're doing this quilt, it has to fit into each other. So I'm just going to line it up here. This is where this goes. Right here. I'm hoping you can see. Of course you can't see it. Right here, this is where this would go. And you can see right here, in this one, we have a hole because we need another piece of sashing in. So when you're laying your blocks out, your blossoms out, take a picture of how you like it. And then the top row, you put sashing in, and the bottom row, you're going to have holes that you're going to fill with more sashing. So once you get all your rows done, you would put in more sashing like this, and at the end of your row, you would put sashing in like, at the end of your row, you'd put sashing in like this, right? You know, like you would fill in the hollow spaces, especially once you lay out all your rows together, you're going to see where you're missing extra sashing bits. Now, I don't know if you've decided to make it this size, where you have 5, 4, 5, 4, 5 blossoms, or whether you went 4 blossoms, 3 blossoms, 4 blossoms, 3. You might have just decided to make a lap size or whatever. But you are going to have on your outer edge sashing to fill in before we put on our border. And we're going to cover how we sew all of this together, all the rows together, next week. But you want to fill in, you want to make your rows and fill in your sashings. That's what your assignment is this week. Does that make sense? So I hope so, but this is where the middle rows don't need sashing because they'll get it from the ones above, right? But at the ends, you'll see when you lay out all your rows together, you'll see where the holes are. So make sure that sashing is in place. Okay? Now we'll see you next week. We hope you have had a great New Year's. We're filming this January 3rd, right? So I'm still kicking around a New Year's resolution here, and my New Year's resolution is to deal with my UFOs. They say it's never a problem with your UFOs as long as it doesn't exceed your age. Mine are already waist high. So I need to do something with them. So I'm not sure how I'm going to make myself accountable, because if I don't make myself accountable, I know myself. If I don't make myself accountable, they're not going to get done, and they need to get done. I don't have a backup plan like leaving them to my daughters to do, or, you know, giving them off to, let's say, a quilt guild to finish or whatever. These quilts are going to charity, and that need for those charity quilts is great. So, not that I feel pressure, it's just that I'm also trying to generate some good karma. I'm hoping 2022 is really gentle and kind to you and your families. So, you have a great day. Bye! Hello everyone, just a quick reminder, this is the quilt we're going to start doing our sew along in the beginning of December 2021. This is a beautiful hand-pieced, hand-quilted. This is a beginner quilt for hand quilting. This is also an intermediate if you're using a sewing machine. And we're going to start this one at the beginning of December 2021. So if you're watching this 8 years from now, don't worry, it's a free pattern. It'll always remain a free pattern. We had a lot of fun doing this with our students, and we had a very enjoyable time. So, if you like the videos, and you like this challenge, and you'd like to start a quilt along, comment below, but like, share, and subscribe with your friends. We are so happy that you're back with us if you're a subscriber. But if you're a new subscriber, please join. This is going to be so much fun. Okay, you have a great day. Bye.